They told him that on his 18th birthday, he would inherit nothing. What he discovered was that they were wrong. If you've ever been told you have nothing, that you come from nothing, then this story is for you. Stick around and maybe share your own story in the comments below. I promise you, someone is listening. The key was cold. Not just cool to the touch like metal left in a shaded room, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep into the bones of my fingers. It was the only thing in my possession that felt truly mine. Everything else, the thin jacket, the worn jeans, the $20 bill folded into a perfect square in my pocket, was a parting gift, a severance package from a life that had never really been a life at all. 18 years. 18 years of institutional gray walls, of scheduled meals, of being a line item in a budget, and on the morning of my 18th birthday, the day of my emancipation, it all ended. Not with a celebration, but with a sterile handshake and a small manila envelope. Ms. Albright, the head administrator of the St. Jude's Home for Boys, slid the envelope across her polished desk. Her face was a practiced mask of professional sympathy, the kind of look you give to a stray animal you can't take in. "Leo," she said, her voice even and smooth, "this is everything. Your birth certificate, your social security card, and a bus ticket. The bus leaves at noon." I didn't open it. I just stared at the metal clasp, a tiny, insignificant gatekeeper to the rest of my life. "That's it?" I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended, a frayed edge on the quiet morning. She sighed, a small puff of air that barely disturbed the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam, slanting across her desk. "There was one other item, from your mother's estate." My heart, a dull, sleeping thing in my chest, gave a painful lurch. My mother. She was a ghost story, a collection of whispers and redacted files. I had a single faded photograph of a woman with my dark hair and sad eyes, a woman I couldn't remember but whose absence was a hollow space inside me. They told me she died when I was 4, a car accident, no family left to take me. That was the official story, the one that got stamped on my file and repeated every time I was moved from one foster home to another, before finally landing at St. Jude's. "Her estate?" I repeated, the words tasting like rust. I was told there was nothing. "And that's essentially correct," Ms. Albright confirmed, her gaze unwavering. "There was no money, no property in the traditional sense. The state settled her debts. When everything was liquidated, there was nothing left over, except this." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out the key. It was old, iron, and ornate, with a complex clover-shaped head and a long, slender shaft. It looked like something that would open a castle door or a treasure chest in a fairy tale. It felt impossibly heavy in her palm. She placed it on the desk next to the envelope. It made a soft, definitive thud. It was logged in her personal effects. The tag simply said it was for the cellar of the old farmhouse. The property itself was foreclosed on years ago, so the deed is long gone. The key is, legally speaking, worthless. Just a piece of metal, but it was hers, and so now it's yours. I picked it up. The cold was immediate, shocking. It felt ancient, heavy with stories I would never know. "So I inherited nothing," I said, the words flat and dead in the air. "Only a key to a locked cellar on a property that isn't mine." "I'm sorry, Leo," she said, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a crack in her professional veneer, a flicker of genuine pity. "The bus ticket is to a town called Havenwood. It's about 4 hours north. It's where the property was. It's the closest thing to a hometown you have." A hometown I'd never seen, a cellar I couldn't legally enter, a key that opened nothing of value. This was my inheritance, the sum total of my 18 years. I closed my hand around the key, the sharp edges of the clover digging into my palm. The pain was grounding, it was real. I took the envelope, stood up, and walked out of her office without another word. I didn't look back at the gray walls of St. Jude's. There was nothing there for me to see. The only thing that mattered now was the cold, heavy weight in my pocket and the name of a town I didn't know, a place where a locked door was waiting for me. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe just a reason for the hollowness, for the ghost story, for the 18 years of waiting for a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The bus ride was a blur of green and gray, a smear of trees and concrete under a sky the color of dishwater. The rhythmic thump of the wheels on the pavement was a monotonous heartbeat, counting down the miles to a place I didn't know if I should call my past or my future. The $20 bill from Ms. Albright was enough for the ticket and a stale sandwich from a vending machine at the station. I sat by the window, the cold key a solid weight in my pocket, my thumb rubbing over its intricate head. Havenwood. The name sounded like a promise and a lie at the same time. A haven in the woods. It sounded peaceful, but I'd learned early on that names were just labels, and they rarely matched the contents. St. Jude's was named for the patron saint of lost causes, a fact that was not lost on any of us who lived there. We were the lost causes, the forgotten children, and the name was a constant, bitter reminder. As the city receded, replaced by sprawling suburbs and then wide-open fields, I let my head rest against the vibrating glass. Memories of my mother were like dream fragments, slippery and unreliable. I remembered the scent of lavender and soil, the feeling of small hands being held by a larger, warmer one. I remembered a song, a simple lullaby hummed low and soft in the dark, but I couldn't conjure her face without the help of the photograph. In the picture, she wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of profound weariness, but her arm was wrapped tightly around the younger version of me on her lap, a fierce, protective embrace. That was the mother I knew. A feeling of protection, a scent, a sound, a ghost. Was this trip a pilgrimage to her grave? I didn't even know where she was buried. The file was sealed, they said, to protect my privacy, but it always felt more like they were protecting me from the truth, whatever that was. Maybe the truth was simply that she was gone and there was nothing more to it. No great mystery, no hidden meaning, just an accident on a rainy night and a 4-year-old boy left behind. The bus wheezed to a stop in what I assumed was the center of Havenwood. It wasn't much of a center. A single main street with a handful of storefronts, a dusty-looking general store, a diner with a flickering neon sign that read, "Eat," a boarded-up movie theater, and a gas station. A few people milled about, their faces etched with the kind of slow, patient boredom that comes from living in a place where nothing ever happens. I stepped off the bus, my worn backpack slung over one shoulder. The air here was different, cleaner, tinged with the smell of damp earth and pine. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones, a stark contrast to the constant low-level hum of the city and the institutional clang of St. Jude's. An old man sitting on a bench outside the general store watched me with watery blue eyes. He nodded slowly as I passed. I nodded back, feeling like an alien stepping onto a new planet. According to the information Ms. Albright had given me, the property was on a road just outside of town, about a 2-mile walk. The old Miller place, the slip of paper said, "Everyone knows it." I went into the general store. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, dissonant note. A woman behind the counter with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from a newspaper. "Help you with something?" she asked. "I'm looking for the old Miller place," I said, my voice feeling too loud in the quiet store. Her smile faltered for a second. "Oh, the Miller place? Hasn't been anyone out there in years. Not since, well, for a long time. You family?" "Something like that," I hedged. She gave me a long, searching look, then seemed to find an answer that satisfied her. "Well, you just head east down this road here. Can't miss it. It's the last house before the road turns to dirt and heads up into the hills. Big old farmhouse, or what's left of it. Be careful out there. Place is falling apart." "Thank you," I said, buying a bottle of water I couldn't really afford. It felt like a necessary provision for a journey into the wilderness. As I left, I heard her murmur to the old man from the bench who had followed me in. "Looks just like her, doesn't he? Same eyes." I pretended not to hear and pushed the door open, the bell chiming my exit. The walk was longer than I expected. The pavement gave way to cracked asphalt, and then to a gravel road lined with overgrown weeds. The houses grew farther apart until there were none at all, just dense woods on either side of the road. The sun was beginning to dip below the treetops, casting long, distorted shadows that looked like grasping fingers. Finally, I saw it. Set back from the road, half swallowed by a sea of tall grass and thorny vines, was a farmhouse. It was a skeleton. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. Windows were dark, empty eyes, and the white paint had peeled away to show the weathered gray wood beneath. It looked haunted not by ghosts, but by time itself, by neglect. This was it. This was my legacy, a ruin. My heart sank, but a strange sense of determination pushed me forward. I wasn't here for the house. I was here for the cellar. I pushed my way through the tall grass, the stalks scratching at my jeans. I circled the decaying structure looking for the cellar entrance. I found it on the north side, almost completely hidden by a wild tangle of overgrown rose bushes, their thorns snagging my jacket. Two slanted wooden doors lay flat against the ground, swollen with years of rain and rot. A heavy, rusted iron hasp held them together, secured by a massive, angry-looking padlock. I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with a grating sound, like a key turning in a lock for the first time in a generation. It didn't want to turn. I put my shoulder into it, gritting my teeth, my breath held tight in my chest. For a moment, nothing happened. I felt a surge of despair, a bitter certainty that this was all a cosmic joke. Of course the key wouldn't work. Of course I'd come all this way for nothing. Then, with a final, desperate shove, there was a loud, agonizing crack. The rust-eaten tumblers inside the lock gave way. The lock sprang open. I pulled it free and lifted the heavy iron hasp. With a groan of protest from the swollen wood and rusted hinges, I heaved one of the doors open. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me, a smell of damp earth, stone, and something else, something like forgotten time. A set of steep stone steps descended into absolute darkness. This was it, the inheritance, a hole in the ground. I took a breath, the scent of the cellar filling my lungs, and started down the steps. The darkness was total. As soon as I was a few steps down, the fading daylight from outside was swallowed whole, and I was plunged into a blind, silent world. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with a nervous chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The small LED light flickered on, cutting a weak, narrow beam through the oppressive black. The stone steps were slick with a thin layer of dampness, and I took them one at a time, my hand braced against the cold, rough stone wall. The air grew cooler, heavier, thick with the smell of wet soil and decay. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed away from the world for a very long time. At the bottom, my feet touched a packed earth floor. I swept the phone's light around the space. It was a small root cellar, no bigger than my room at St. Jude's. The walls were made of large, uneven fieldstones, slick with condensation. Thick, dusty cobwebs hung from the low wooden beams of the ceiling like funeral shrouds. In one corner, a pile of rotting burlap sacks had collapsed into a heap of mold and fibers. In another, a few empty glass jars sat on a rickety wooden shelf, coated in a thick layer of grime. It was empty. Of course it was empty. A wave of hollow disappointment washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. What had I expected? A hidden treasure, a secret message. I had built this up in my mind, turned this worthless key into a symbol of hope, and for what? An empty, forgotten hole. I was an idiot, a stupid kid chasing a ghost story. I slumped down onto the bottom step, the cold stone seeping through my jeans. I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes, the tightness in my throat that I had learned to swallow down over 18 years. I wouldn't cry, not here, not for this. I had nothing. Ms. Albright was right. I had inherited absolutely nothing. I was about to turn and leave, to climb back out into the dying light, and walk away from this final, cruel joke when my phone's beam caught something. It wasn't much, just a slight discoloration on the far wall behind the rotting sacks, a patch of stone that looked drier than the rest. Curiosity, that last stubborn ember of hope, flickered within me. I stood up and kicked at the pile of sacks. They disintegrated into a cloud of foul-smelling dust that made me cough and choke. Behind them, tucked into a small alcove in the stone wall, was a wooden crate. It was an old military-style footlocker, painted olive drab with stenciled letters on the side that had long since faded into illegibility. On top of it sat an old hurricane lamp, its glass globe miraculously intact, and a small tin box of matches. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't forgotten. This was stored. This was left here on purpose. My hands were shaking as I picked up the matchbox. I struck one, the sudden flare of light blinding me for a second. I carefully lifted the lamp's globe and lit the wick. A warm yellow glow pushed back the oppressive darkness, filling the small cellar with flickering shadows. The light felt ancient, alive. It felt like a vigil that had been waiting for years to be lit. I set the lamp down on the floor and turned my attention to the crate. It wasn't locked. Two simple metal latches held the lid closed. I lifted them, the sound of the metal scraping open echoing in the small space. I held my breath and lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick, canvas-wrapped bundle. It was heavy. I carefully lifted it out and placed it on the floor. Unfolding the canvas, I found it was filled with blankets, woolen and smelling faintly of cedar, a desperate attempt to ward off the damp. They were wrapped around something, a large leather-bound journal, a stack of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon, and a small velvet pouch. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. This was something. I reached for the envelopes first. My name, Leo, was written on the top one in elegant looping cursive. A handwriting I had never seen before, but I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that it was my mother's. I untied the ribbon, my fingers fumbling. The paper of the first envelope was thick and creamy, aged to a soft ivory. I broke the wax seal, a simple, unadorned circle, and unfolded the letter inside. The page was filled with that same beautiful script, the ink slightly faded but perfectly clear in the warm lamplight. "My dearest Leo," it began, and as I read those first words, the sound of my own ragged breathing was the only thing I could hear. The world outside, the failing farmhouse, the 18 years of gray nothingness, it all fell away. There was only the warm glow of the lamp, the earthy smell of the cellar, and my mother's voice, reaching out to me from across the years. The letter felt impossibly fragile in my hands, a relic from a life I'd never known. I had to force myself to read slowly, to absorb every word, every curve of her handwriting. "My dearest Leo," the letter continued, "if you are reading this, it means you have turned 18. It means you are a man now, and it means that I have failed in my promise to come back for you. For that, my love, I am more sorry than words can ever say. The thought of you growing up alone, of you thinking you were abandoned, has been a constant torment, the only thing that has kept me going and the thing that has broken my heart 1,000 times over." I had to stop. I squeezed my eyes shut, the pressure doing nothing to stop the hot tears that finally broke free, tracing cold paths through the grime on my cheeks. Abandoned, that was the word. It was the word that had been carved into the foundation of my entire existence. And here she was, in this letter from the past, naming it, acknowledging it. It was a strange kind of relief, like having a doctor finally give a name to a chronic pain you've suffered for years. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. I need you to understand. I did not leave you because I didn't love you. I left you because I loved you more than my own life. Everything I did to protect you. There were people, Leo, dangerous people, who your father got involved with. He made a mistake, a terrible one, and he paid for it with his life. But his debt did not die with him. They came looking for it, and they were going to take it from you, from us. I couldn't let that happen. My father, another ghost. I had no pictures of him, no stories, just a blank space on my birth certificate. He was a mistake, a debt, and he was dead. The information was delivered so matter-of-factly, a piece of a puzzle I never even knew was missing. I ran, she wrote. I took you and I ran. We lived in hiding for a year, moving from place to place. But they were relentless. They found us. I knew I couldn't protect you forever on the run. The only way to keep you safe, truly safe, was to make you disappear, to hide you in the one place they would never think to look, in plain sight, in the system. I faked my death, created a story of a car accident, and made sure you were taken in. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, Leo. Walking away from that hospital, knowing you were inside and I could never come back. It almost destroyed me. The cellar felt like it was closing in on me. The air was thick, hard to breathe. She was alive, or she had been when she wrote this. She hadn't died in a car crash. The entire foundation of my life, the one solid fact I had clung to, that I was an orphan, was a lie told to save me. I felt a confusing storm of emotions, rage at the lie, grief for the mother I thought was dead, and a profound, aching love for the woman who had made such an impossible sacrifice. The letter went on. This place, this cellar, is all I have left to give you. The house above is worthless, the land likely seized by the state for unpaid taxes. But the land is not the inheritance, my son. The inheritance is the chance to be free. I have left you what I could, enough for a new start. You must look for the loose stone, 3rd row from the floor, 4th from the left, on the north wall. Your grandfather taught me how to build these walls to last, and how to build in a secret or two. Trust the stones, Leo. They hold our history. I looked up from the letter, my eyes scanning the north wall, the one directly in front of me. The lamplight cast deep shadows between the stones, making them all look alike. 3rd row from the floor, 4th from the left. I scrambled over, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I ran my hands over the cold, damp surface of the stones, counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th stone felt different. It wasn't sealed with mortar like the others. I pressed my fingers into the seam around it. It shifted just a fraction of an inch. Using my fingernails, I pried at the edge. It was heavy, but it moved. Slowly scraping against its neighbors, the stone came loose. I pulled it free and set it on the floor. Behind it was a dark, hollow space, and inside that space was a small tin box wrapped in oilcloth. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. I unwrapped the oilcloth, which had kept the box perfectly dry and free of rust. It was a simple biscuit tin. The painted image of a smiling English family on the lid faded and chipped. I pried the lid open. It was full of money, stacks of it. Old, soft bills, 20s, 50s, 100s, all bound with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. I didn't count it, but I knew it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Nestled on top of the cash was a small, leather-bound pouch. I opened it and poured the contents into my palm, a silver locket on a delicate chain. I opened the locket. On one side was a tiny version of the photo I had of my mother and me. On the other was a picture of a man with my same dark hair and a kind, handsome face. My father. And beneath the pouch was one more letter, this one smaller, the envelope sealed with the same wax circle. I picked it up. My mother's handwriting was there again, but this time it seemed more hurried, more urgent. This was the inheritance, not a key to an empty room, but a box full of secrets, a second chance, and the crushing weight of a truth I was not prepared for. Before I go on, I just have to pause here. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It's not an easy one to tell, and maybe it's hitting a nerve with you. Maybe you've also had a moment where everything you thought was true turned out to be a lie, where the ground just fell out from under you. If you have, I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here, it's for people like us, people who have had to dig through the rubble of their past to find something to build a future on. So if you feel that connection, hit that subscribe button. Become a part of this, because my story isn't over yet, and the hardest part was still to come. Now, let's get back to that cellar. I sat there on the dirt floor for a long time, the biscuit tin of money in my lap, the second letter clutched in my hand. The warm, flickering light of the hurricane lamp seemed to make the shadows dance, and for a moment, I felt like I was in a dream, a strange, underground world where the dead could speak and the past was a tangible thing. The sheer weight of it all was suffocating. My mother was alive. She had orchestrated my entire life from a distance, sacrificing her own freedom to give me mine. The love in that act was so immense, it was painful, a bright, burning light that cast the gray emptiness of my life into even starker relief. But there was anger there, too, a deep, childish anger that I had been left alone, that I had been forced to carry the label of orphan like a brand. I was angry at my father, the ghost who had brought this chaos into our lives. And I was angry at the world for being a place where a mother would have to make such an impossible choice. Finally, I drew a deep, shuddering breath and opened the second letter. The handwriting was messier, the words more cramped, as if written in a great hurry. "My Leo," it began, "this is the harder letter to write and the one I pray you will understand. The money in this box is everything I have left. It is blood money in a way. It is what I was able to salvage, to hide, to scrape together after your father was gone. It is not clean, but it is yours. It is your chance to start over somewhere new, somewhere they will never find you. Do not stay in Havenwood. Do not try to reclaim this land. There is nothing for you here but ghosts and bad memories. Take the money, get on a bus, and go west. Change your name. Build a life for yourself that is quiet and safe, a life where you are beholden to no one. That is all I have ever wanted for you." The letter was a clear set of instructions, a getaway plan. She hadn't just given me a past. She had laid out a future of running, of hiding, a future where I would have to become a ghost, just like her. The idea was terrifying and seductive at the same time. I could walk out of this cellar, leave Havenwood behind, and never look back. I could be anyone I wanted to be. No more Leo from St. Jude's. No more orphan, just a young man with a pocket full of cash and no history to weigh him down. "The people your father owed," the letter continued, "they are not the kind who forgive or forget. Their organization is vast. Staying here, putting down roots, would be like painting a target on your back. They may believe I am dead, but if a boy with my eyes and your father's name suddenly reappeared and claimed this land, they would notice. Do not be brave, my son. Be smart. Be safe. Your life is the only thing that matters. Live it well for both of us. All my love, forever, Mom. I folded the letter and placed it back in the tin with the money. Her words echoed in my head. Do not be brave, be smart. For 18 years, I had been neither. I had simply endured. I survived. Now she was giving me a choice. For the first time in my life, I had agency. I had options. I could follow her plan and disappear, or what? What was the alternative? Stay here in this dying town and try to fix a broken-down house on a piece of land that wasn't even legally mine. It was insane. It was the opposite of smart. It was the kind of thing a brave, stupid kid in a movie would do. I packed everything back into the crate. The letters, the journal, the locket. I left the blankets. I picked up the tin box of money. It felt impossibly heavy now, not with the weight of paper and ink, but with the weight of my mother's fear. I extinguished the lamp, plunging the cellar back into darkness, and used my phone's light to guide me up the stone steps. As I emerged from the ground, the cool night air was a shock. The sun had set completely, and a canopy of brilliant, unfamiliar stars stretched across the sky. I had never seen so many stars. The city lights had always washed them out. Here, in the profound darkness of the countryside, they burned with a fierce, cold light. It was beautiful, and it made me feel very, very small. I pushed the heavy cellar doors, closed and slid the hasp into place, but I didn't lock it. I didn't know why. It just felt wrong to seal it up again. I made my way back to the front of the house, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Run, stay, disappear, fight. As I rounded the corner of the porch, which sagged like a tired old man, my phone's light caught a piece of paper tacked to the front door. It was a bright neon orange, a jarring slash of color against the weathered gray wood. It looked official. My stomach twisted into a knot. I walked up the rickety steps, which groaned in protest under my weight, and pulled the paper free. It was a final notice of foreclosure. The property listed under my mother's name, Clara Miller, was to be seized by the county for delinquent property taxes and auctioned off in 30 days. The notice was dated last week. At the bottom, a name was printed under the county letterhead, "Inquiries to be directed to Ridgeview Development Corp." The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. The amount of back taxes owed was listed in bold, black numbers. I stared at it, my blood running cold. It was a lot of money. But as I looked at the number, a strange sense of dark humor washed over me. I opened the biscuit tin and looked at the stacks of cash inside. After a quick, rough count, I realized the amount of taxes owed was almost exactly to within a few $100s, the amount of money my mother had left me. It wasn't just a choice between running and staying anymore. It was a choice between my future and her past. I could use the money to escape just as she had instructed, or I could use it to pay the debt to save this broken piece of land, to defy her last wish in order to honor her sacrifice. Do not be brave, be smart. Standing there on that crumbling porch, under a sky full of silent, watching stars, I had no idea which was which. The night was long. I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch steps of that ruined house, the tin box beside me, and watched the stars move across the sky. The foreclosure notice felt like a ticking clock, each second a countdown to a decision that would define the rest of my life. My mother's voice from the letters was a constant presence in my head, a duet of love and fear. Run, Leo, be safe. This place is full of ghosts. But as I sat there, breathing in the scent of pine and damp earth, I felt something I hadn't felt in 18 years, a connection. This broken land, this skeletal house, it was mine. Not legally, not yet, but in a deeper way. It was the last place she had been, the place she had chosen as her final bastion. She had built a fortress for me in that cellar, a legacy of survival. To walk away from it felt like a betrayal, not of her instructions, but of her struggle. Was it smart to stay? No, her warning was clear. Ridgeview Development Corp. The name echoed with a corporate coldness that felt menacing, and the people she had fled from, they were still out there somewhere. Staying was a risk, a huge, stupid risk, but running felt wrong. It felt like I would be running for the rest of my life. I would always be looking over my shoulder, always carrying the weight of a past I had abandoned. If I stayed, if I fought, at least I would be standing on my own 2 feet, on ground that held my history. I would be choosing to face the ghosts instead of being haunted by them. By dawn, the sky had turned a soft, pearly gray, and a decision had settled in my heart. It wasn't a logical choice, not a smart one. It was a choice born of a desperate need to put down roots, to honor the woman who had given up everything so that I could have this one impossible chance. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. I walked the 2 miles back into Havenwood as the sun rose, casting a golden light over the sleepy town. The diner was open, the eat sign now dark. I went inside. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was overwhelming, a scent of simple, everyday normalcy that felt like it belonged to another world. The same woman from the general store was behind the counter, a different apron tied around her waist. She looked surprised to see me. "You're back," she said. "Find what you were looking for out at the old Miller place." "I think so," I said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "I need some help. I need to find a lawyer." Her expression softened with concern. "In some kind of trouble?" "The kind you have to pay to get out of," I replied, trying for a lightness I didn't feel. She pointed with her coffee pot to a small, unassuming office across the street. "Arthur Henderson. He's been the town lawyer for 40 years. He's honest, which is more than I can say for most. A bit of a grump, but his heart's in the right place." An hour later, I was sitting in Mr. Henderson's office. It was a cramped space overflowing with towers of books and files that looked like they might collapse at any moment. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. Mr. Henderson himself was a man who seemed to be made of tweed and wrinkles. He peered at me over a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, his expression skeptical. I told him everything. I laid it all out: St. Jude's, the key, the cellar, the letters, the money, the foreclosure notice. I left out the part about the dangerous people my mother was running from. It felt too raw, too dangerous to speak aloud. When I was finished, I pushed the notice across his cluttered desk. He picked it up, his bushy gray eyebrows knitting together as he read. "Ridgeview Development," he grumbled, the name sounding like a curse on his lips. "Vultures. They've been buying up delinquent properties all over the county. They have a man on the inside at the tax office. Get the notices before anyone else. They swoop in, pay the taxes, and take the land for pennies on the dollar before the families even know what's happening." He looked at me, his gaze sharp and appraising. "You say the money in that box is enough to cover the debt?" "Almost exactly," I confirmed. He leaned back in his creaking chair, steepling his fingers. "So your mother, Clara, wanted you to take this money and run, start a new life. And you, a boy with nothing to his name but a box of cash and a whole lot of trouble, want to ignore her dying wish and pour it all into a derelict property that's legally owned by the county." "It's not her dying wish," I said quietly. "She wasn't dying when she wrote it. She was scared. And the property isn't owned by the county yet. We have 23 days. He was silent for a long moment, studying my face. I met his gaze, my resolve hardening. I would not be dismissed as some foolish kid. "This is a bad idea, son," he said finally, his voice softer now. "Ridgeview has deep pockets and sharp lawyers. They won't just walk away, they'll fight you." "I don't care," I said. "That land is the only thing I have of her, of my family. I'm not letting it go." A slow smile spread across his wrinkled face. It transformed his grumpy demeanor entirely. "Your mother was Clara Miller?" I knew her. Knew her parents, too. She was a fighter, stubborn as a mule. Looks like she passed that on to you. He leaned forward, his expression all business. "All right, son, here's what we're going to do. The county doesn't want the land. They want the money. We'll go to the courthouse today and pay the delinquent taxes in full. That will stop the auction and remove Ridgeview's immediate claim. But it won't make you the owner. The deed is still in your mother's name, and since she is legally deceased, the property is part of her estate. An estate you are the sole heir to. We will have to file a petition with the probate court to have the deed transferred to you. It's a mountain of paperwork, and Ridgeview will try to challenge it every step of the way, claiming you have no legitimate standing. It will be a long, ugly fight." "Can we win?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave me that slow smile again. "I haven't lost a fight in my own town yet. It'll cost you. My retainer is $500. The rest of my fees can be paid if and when we secure the property." It was a generous offer. I opened the tin box, which I had brought with me in my backpack, and counted out $500 in old, soft bills. The moment I handed it to him, it felt real. The fight had begun. We spent the rest of the day at the county courthouse, a stuffy, imposing building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. Paying the taxes was surprisingly simple. The clerk, a woman with a severe bun and a bored expression, barely looked up as Mr. Henderson explained the situation. She stamped the papers with a satisfying thud, and just like that, the immediate threat was gone. Ridgeview's ambush had been thwarted, but as we walked out onto the courthouse steps, blinking in the afternoon sun, I knew this was just the first battle in a much longer war. The easy part was over. Now I had to prove I had the right to a home that I had never known, a home my mother had died, or disappeared, to protect. The next few months were a blur of work and waiting. The legal process moved at a glacial pace. Mr. Henderson filed the petitions, and as predicted, Ridgeview's lawyers immediately filed motions to dismiss. They argued that my claim was tenuous, that my identity as Clara Miller's son was unproven without a DNA test, which was impossible. They painted me as an opportunist, a stranger trying to lay claim to an abandoned property. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition, fought through paper and legal jargon. While the lawyers battled, I went to work on the land. I couldn't do much with the house itself. It needed a new roof, new plumbing, new everything, but I could reclaim the land from the wilderness that had consumed it. I used a few $100s of the remaining money to buy a scythe, an axe, and some heavy-duty work gloves at the general store. The woman who ran it, whose name I learned was Martha, gave me a sad, knowing smile. "Hard work clearing that place," she said. "Your grandparents poured their whole lives into that soil. Every morning I would walk out to the property and begin. I started with the tall grass, swinging the scythe in long, rhythmic arcs, the whisper of the blade a constant companion. It was back-breaking work. My hands, soft from years of indoor life, were quickly covered in blisters that broke and bled and eventually hardened into calluses. My muscles ached with a deep, satisfying pain. As I cleared the grass, I uncovered the ghosts of a life that had once been there, a stone-lined path to the front door, the faint outline of what must have been a flower garden, a rusty child's swing set half swallowed by the earth. Each discovery was a bittersweet revelation, a piece of a life I could have had. I cleared the thorny rose bushes from the cellar entrance. I chopped down the dead trees that threatened the house. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to push back the chaos, to impose a semblance of order on the neglect. The town watched me. At first it was with suspicion, I was an outsider, a strange boy from the city working on the haunted Miller place. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. One afternoon, the old man from the bench, whose name was Earl, showed up with a thermos of hot coffee and 2 sandwiches. He didn't say much. He just sat on a tree stump and watched me work. "Your mother used to love the roses on that trellis," he said, pointing to the mess of thorns I was untangling from the porch. "Planted 'em with her own 2 hands. Another day, Martha from the store drove out in her pickup truck. "Found this in my husband's shed," she said, unloading an old but sturdy push mower. "No sense in you killing yourself with that scythe." People started to talk to me, to share small memories of my mother, of my grandparents. They told me about Clara's fierce independence, her kindness, her love for that land. They were giving me back my history, one story at a time. I was no longer just an orphan. I was Clara Miller's son. I was a part of this place. But the fight with Ridgeview loomed over everything. Their lawyers were relentless, filing motion after motion, trying to drown us in paperwork and legal fees. The money in the biscuit tin was dwindling fast. I had enough to live on. I was renting a cheap room in town, but there wasn't much left. Mr. Henderson was worried. "They're trying to bleed you dry, Leo," he warned me one evening in his office. "They know you don't have the resources for a protracted fight. They're hoping you'll give up." "I'm not giving up," I said, my voice hard. But fear was a cold knot in my stomach. What if she was right? What if I should have just run? That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the property, needing to feel the solid ground beneath my feet. I sat on the porch steps, the same spot where I had made my decision weeks ago. The house was still a ruin, but now it was a ruin I knew, a ruin I had bled for. I felt a surge of despair. Maybe this was all a mistake, a brave, stupid mistake. I went to the cellar, my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. I needed to feel that connection again, to read her letters, to remind myself why I was doing this. I found the crate and pulled out the leather-bound journal. I hadn't looked at it yet. It had felt too private, too painful. But tonight I needed it. I sat on the cold stone steps and opened it. It was my mother's journal. Her handwriting filled the pages. It started years ago, before I was born. It was filled with her hopes, her dreams for the farm, her love for my father. And then the entries turned darker. She wrote about his debts, his fear, his involvement with people she only referred to as them. She wrote about his death, not as an accident, but as a murder. And she wrote about her decision to run, to hide me, to save me. The last entry was dated the day before she left me at the hospital. "I am leaving this journal here in the heart of our home," she wrote. "With it, I leave my story. If Leo ever finds this, I want him to know he was born of love, not of debt and fear. This land is our anchor. I pray one day he can return to it. There is one last secret the stones hold, not of money, but of truth. The deed to this land is not with the county. It was never foreclosed on. Your grandfather paid the taxes in a lump sum for 50 years in advance, the year before he died. The official deed, the true one, is hidden. Look to the hearth, my son, the foundation of the home." I stared at the page, my heart hammering. The hearth, the massive stone fireplace, in the main room of the house. It was the one part of the structure that was still perfectly solid, a pillar of strength in the surrounding decay. The deed. If she was telling the truth, then Ridgeview's entire case, the county's claim, it was all based on a lie, or at least a mistake. A clerical error buried for decades. This could change everything. I ran up the stairs, my mind racing. I burst into the main room of the house. The fireplace was huge, a cavern of soot and stone. I ran my hands over the stones around the hearth. just as I had in the cellar, looking for anything loose, any seam that wasn't right. Nothing. It was solid. Desperate, I started tapping on the stones, listening for a hollow sound. And then I found it. The hearthstone itself. The large, flat slab of granite at the base of the fireplace. When I tapped it in the center, it made a different sound. A dull, empty thud. I got my fingers under the edge and pulled. It was immensely heavy, but it lifted, tilting on a hidden pivot. Beneath it was a small, hollowed-out compartment, and inside, wrapped in the same protective oilcloth, was a long, folded document. The original deed to the Miller farm, stamped and sealed, with a receipt from the county tax office dated 25 years ago marked "Paid in Full." I had it. I had the truth. The next morning, I was in Mr. Henderson's office before he had even finished his first cup of coffee. I laid the deed on his desk. He stared at it, then at me, then back at the deed. He read it 3 times, his eyes wide with disbelief. A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he whispered, his voice thick with awe. "Clara Miller, you magnificent, stubborn woman." He looked at me, his eyes shining. "Leo, this is it. This is the cannonball that sinks their ship. Their entire claim is based on the county's erroneous tax records. This document proves the property was never delinquent, that the county had no right to seize it or auction it. Their case is built on sand." The feeling that washed over me was so immense, so powerful, it almost brought me to my knees. It was relief, but it was more than that. It was vindication. It was the feeling of my mother's love, her foresight, reaching across all those years to protect me one last time. She hadn't just left me money to run, she had left me a weapon to fight with. She had trusted that I would be brave enough, or maybe stubborn enough, to stay. The legal battle ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, anticlimactic whimper. Mr. Henderson presented the original deed to the judge at our next hearing. Ridgeview's lawyers, a pair of slick, arrogant men in expensive suits, were left speechless. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had seemed perpetually annoyed by our case, examined the document, verified its authenticity with the county archives, and dismissed Ridgeview's claim with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. It was over. I had won. Walking out of the courthouse that day was a completely different experience. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I was a landowner. I was a son who had honored his mother's legacy. Mr. Henderson clapped me on the shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "You did good, son. You did real good. Your mother would be proud." The news spread through Havenwood like wildfire. That evening at the diner, my meal was on the house. People came up to my table to shake my hand, to congratulate me. Earl, Martha, and a dozen other faces I now knew by name. They weren't just being neighborly. There was a sense of shared victory. I had fought off the vultures that they all feared. In fighting for my home, I had, in a small way, been fighting for theirs, too. The resolution wasn't a fairy tale ending. I had my home, but it was still a wreck. I had spent almost all of the money from the biscuit tin on legal fees and living expenses. I had a deed, but I was essentially broke. The house needed a roof, windows, electricity, plumbing. It needed everything. The ghosts were still there, too. The truth of my father's death, the shadowy organization my mother had fled from. Those were dangers that might still be out there. The scars of my 18 years in the system hadn't magically disappeared. I was still haunted by the loneliness, by the feeling of being unwanted. But something fundamental had changed. I was no longer adrift. I had an anchor. That night, I didn't go back to my rented room in town. I went out to the farmhouse with a sleeping bag and a lantern. I swept out a corner of the main room, right in front of the great stone hearth. I laid out my sleeping bag and sat there in the quiet, empty house. It didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of history, of struggle, of love. It was mine. The work ahead was daunting, a mountain of labor and expense I had no idea how I would conquer. But for the first time in my life, I felt a profound sense of peace. I wasn't running from the past. I was building on top of it. I had a foundation. I found a job working for a local construction crew, learning the skills I would need to rebuild the house myself. The pay was low, but the education was priceless. Every evening, every weekend, I would work on the farmhouse. I started with the roof, patching the holes, replacing the rotten timbers. It was slow, grueling work. The people of Havenwood helped. Earl, a retired carpenter, showed me how to frame a window. Martha's husband taught me the basics of wiring. They would show up with food, with tools, with an hour or two of labor to spare. They were investing in me, in the memory of the Miller family, in the idea that a place and a person could be reclaimed. I was no longer just Clara Miller's son. I was their neighbor. One day, while clearing out the last of the rotted furniture from an upstairs bedroom, I found one final thing. Tucked into the back of a drawer in a collapsing nightstand was a small sealed envelope. It had no name on it. I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter, but a photograph. It was of my mother and father, taken on what looked like their wedding day. They were standing in front of the farmhouse, which was in full bloom, painted a brilliant white, the rose trellis overflowing. They were smiling, young, and full of hope. And my mother, she was pregnant, with me. Tucked behind the photo was a small slip of paper. On it, in her beautiful script, were just a few words. "This is how I want you to remember us. Not the end of the story, but the beginning. Your life is your own now. Build a good one." I held that photograph for a long time, the tears falling freely now. These weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of gratitude. She had given me everything. She had given me a past to understand, a present to fight for, and a future to build. The house is still a work in progress. It probably always will be, but it's a home. It's solid. It's mine. I have a community. I have a history. I found my inheritance not in a box of money, but in a key, in a crumbling foundation, and in the choice to stay. And that brings us to today. I'm telling you this story from that very house. The sun is coming in through a window I framed myself, and I can smell the roses I replanted on the trellis outside. My mother was wrong about one thing. She told me not to be brave, but to be smart. What I learned is that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is to be brave enough to stand your ground, to fight for the places and the people that make you who you are. The real inheritance isn't what's left to you. It's what you decide to build with it. So now I want to ask you, what have you inherited? I'm not talking about money or property. I'm talking about the other things. The strength of a mother you never knew. The stubbornness of a grandfather you've only heard stories about. The love that someone packed away for you in a box of memories. These are the things that truly matter, the foundations we build our lives on. I want you to share your story in the comments below. Tell me about your inheritance, about the key you were given that opened up your world. I will read every single one, because stories are how we know we're not alone. If this story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen, then please subscribe to the channel. Let's continue to build this community together, a place for the lost causes who found their way home. Thank you for listening.